Hi, my name is Trisha. I'm a fragrance consultant, and I was told there was a big reunion happening today, and I've been asked to talk about reunions. So this one time, this girl comes in and she says she has a really big reunion planned. She says she wants to reunite everybody together in the flame of chaos. And to do that, she needs grapes. And I tell her, okay, grape is really fun. I like grape a lot. I mix grape and arterial leaf together. It's part of my sugar and spice collection. But if you're going to be dealing with the flame of chaos, it's going to be hot. You want to go with something fresher. You want to try lime. So she tells me that everyone at the reunion, it's all going to be people who are consumed with despair and wish they were never born. And I tell her, that's because they're jealous of you, because you're living your truth. In the end, she took the lime, the grape, and, on my suggestion, some lavender for mindfulness.
Test, test, test.
Test, test, test.
Test, test, test.
In the beginning of the episode, what I will do is I will initiate a meditation exercise so that the audience, they know something's up, but they don't know what. And then at the end of the meditation, you show up and it's very exciting and surprising.
Sounds good.
Hi, Sophie.
Hi, Sin.
Hi, everyone. And welcome to the Snack Covenant, episode F6. Now, Sophie.
Yes, Sin.
I'd like to start this episode with a meditation exercise.
Oh, good, good.
I'd like everyone to close their eyes. Imagine you're on a beach. The sun is hitting your face. You're playing Elden Ring or maybe Bloodborne.
At the beach.
It's wireless.
On Switch.
You look into the distance. And oh my god, who's there with us?
Can you hear me right now?
Yes. Aegon looks very confused.
You do? Okay. Hi, it's me, John Bloodborne. How are you?
I should have clued in when Sin said, oh yeah, this is a very important reunion. And I'm like, yeah, I guess, but you know, there's someone missing.
Yeah, so I found out about 10 minutes ago that you guys didn't know I was coming. So I think I made some kind of joke on a previous episode of this podcast at some point, because I feel like the only way to get me onto this podcast is if Sin doesn't tell anyone that I'm coming. I'm still happy to be here. Hello.
Yeah, we're happy to have you.
Yay!
Yeah.
The band is back together.
The band is
Yeah,
back
it's
together.
been a long time.
It has.
I recently realized that it's been 7 years since Bloodborne came out. And
Wow.
I realized that when I was preparing for this episode, and I was like, I don't remember anything about this game anymore.
yeah. Yeah, I haven't played it in like over 3 years maybe. So like it's been a long time since I've even like put that disc in and played it. So.
Like Redgrave mentioned, Bloodborne came out like 7 years ago, so there's a new generation of lore hunters. But you know, just in case anybody from the new generation may not be aware of the gods that are in our presence.
I wouldn't go that far. But.
Could you please introduce yourselves?
So I am Redgrave. I wrote The Pale Blood Hunt. The first version of it, I think I wrote it came out about a month and a half after the game first came out, and then updated it after the DLC came out, which was like 6 or 7 months later. I don't actually remember the exact timeline, but then like 6 or 7 months later, I kind of rewrote it. Made a few videos on some of the topics that I didn't get a chance to cover, and then have been on a few podcasts and stuff like that. I mostly just have written a lot of stuff. I don't really make a lot of like lore hunting videos or content like that, but I like to gather information and write about it.
Awesome. Aegon?
Hello, my name is Aegon of Astora, not my actual name, but I started making YouTube videos in 2014, in which, as a grad student with too much time on my hands, I decided, hey, there may be 10 or 15 people out there who would be interested in hearing grad student in the social sciences talk about the Souls games and FromSoft games from a sort of critical academic social sciences perspective. And it turned out there were, not 15 people, but maybe like a couple hundred people who were really interested in that. And so I'm very fortunate and lucky to have, lots of people who are actually still watching my videos. And I did a series called Dark Souls 2 Let's Talk Lore, which was my first ever playthrough on YouTube. But that was really in preparation for my first playthrough proper, which was Bloodborne Let's Talk, or not my blind playthrough of Bloodborne. And then after that, I did a series called Bloodborne Let's Talk Lore, which was my first lore playthrough proper, in which we went through every area and had guests on, including Sophie and Redgrave.
Hey, how you doing? It's Tadetaka Miyazaki here. So, they were just talking about, like, Bloodborne, so I thought I'd fill you all in on that. So, right after Dark Souls became a big hit, Bandai wrote to me and immediately demanded 7 sequels, and I said, fuck it, give that shit to Yui. I had to come up with my own project. And I couldn't really think of anything, and unfortunately, Eidos still owned the rights to Berserk at that point, so I didn't know what to do. So I was talking to my cousin, Ricky Miyazaki, and he says to me, you know that Brotherhood of the Wolf movie? You do that, but you add the Cthulhu's. So that was the genesis of Bloodborne. Dark Beast Paul is still my idea, though. Now back to these assholes.
So, you've been on the podcast a couple of times, and a couple of things changed since you've been here. Now, obviously, I'm talking about the angelic outline. It has an animation and a voice.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat upon the cloud, thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee too.
Here are top 8 Cremaster Cycle fan theories that turned out to be true. Spoiler warning, in effect.
What the heck is that?
That was like a YouTuber voice at the end, right? Like you have to like, comment, and subscribe at the end.
Essentially what happened is, this is a good summation of the podcast in general, is that Sin made us do an outline for the episodes because they were getting too off track. And then over time the outline itself was personified as a character, who now no longer provides an outline and is just there to put the episode off track.
So you don't actually have an outline anymore. It's just the character.
Essentially, yes.
Okay, got it. That's fantastic.
What we wanted to do is we wanted to bring Aegon on because, like you mentioned, you were a graduate student in the social sciences at the time. And you brought up Foucault a lot when you were talking about Bloodborne. And you talked about Foucault for the entire game, and you never ever dwelt on the fact that the main building in Bloodborne is a combination hospital, school, prison.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that being given the opportunity to address that. So where did we want to start then?
I think we can start with the Healing Church.
Thank you, Sin.
So, Redgrave, Aegon, what does the Healing Church mean to you?
What does it mean to me? Like personally? Like my personal relationship with the Healing Church? Well, I guess like on a basic level, the Healing Church is the organized body in Yharnam that is pretty much, by the time we get there, they've sort of become the...
It's almost a totalitarian government.
Kind of. There's a concept that is becoming less common in modern days, but it's something that historically has been extremely common in small villages and towns, which is that you will get some kind of large corporation or family or company that owns a significant source of labor, like a factory or a fishery or a mine. And you have these towns, you have these all throughout like Midwest America, for example, that become these company towns where everyone in town either works for the factory or they work at a place that serves the factory, and the factory has its thumbs in every business in the town. And you have this kind of institution that becomes kind of all encompassing, and every aspect of this town or village is like related to that, and you can't really separate the two anymore. Because it's interesting, like Yharnam as a city, the people who are currently living in Yharnam are not the original native people. Like the indigenous people of Yharnam are the Thumerians. And then sometime very, very long periods of time pass, and then you get these people who arrive in Yharnam. And the Healing Church kind of is the body of power that provides like support. It has an educated class, which the people of Yharnam are not really shown to have had before that point in time. So what you have is you have education, you have medicine, you have structure, you have organized fighting forces in the form of like Gehrman and Maria in the beginning, and then you have Ludwig and the Healing Church Hunters and all that stuff. So it's basically this organized body that has become the governing entity of this town by the time we get there.
Mm-hmm. Aegon?
Yeah, well said.
Thank you.
In making notes for this, I was thinking how best to approach this topic. And so basically, I can't really think of any other way other than establishing what I would consider like a theoretical framework for the discussion. If what we're talking about is, you know, how the church normalizes people in the population and you know, discursively creates its subjects, then
Yeah.
Okay, so 3 different things I want to talk about. So the first is a concept called governmentality. So that is government mentality at the end, or govern mentality rather, disciplinary power, and biopolitics, and thinking about those 3 things together as a lens for thinking about the role of the Healing Church in Bloodborne. So governmentality, in order to talk about governmentality, we need to talk about Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault was a French, I believe he was regarded as a post-structuralist, a social theorist, and a philosopher whose work remains central in many fields of study, including my own. I have a PhD in science and technology studies, and much of science and technology studies is about Michel Foucault and that understanding of power and discourse. And so Michel Foucault defines government. So you talk about governmentality, you think it might be like how to think like a government. And that's not exactly it. So he defines government, not thinking of like an institutional body that runs a given state or municipality or province, but about conduct in general and the conduct of conduct in particular. So how do people govern themselves? How do people govern others? So for Foucault, the problem of government is nothing like, you know, do I vote conservative or liberal? What form of government best represents the democratic will of the people? You know, you might think of those things as being the problem of government, but for Foucault, the problem of government is more about how to coerce individuals to act in a certain way without forcing them to act in that way. How can you sort of create this structure such that people are encouraged to behave in a certain manner without realizing they're being encouraged and led down that path and how to behave in that manner? Because, you know, we all live in what are ostensibly democratic societies. We're all free, quote unquote, to do whatever we please. We have individual rights. So then you might think like that's very strange, that like this idea that we'd be forced to behave in a certain way, but we all are in very subtle and ways that we don't seemingly realize. So, or as Foucault put it, and this is a direct quote, governing people is not a way to force people to do what the governor wants. It is always a versatile equilibrium. So it's about establishing a range of acceptable, so this is me speaking again, it's about establishing a range of acceptable possibilities for how we behave, and then rehabilitating those who fall outside the range, rehabilitating them so they bring them in line with everyone else. But how do you coerce people to remain within that range of possibilities? The answer to this question lies with the notion of governmentality. So again, so if you split it into 2 words, or what I should do is actually, it's time for Fun with Definitions.
Woo!
Yay!
I missed it so much.
So governmentality, it's not about teaching individuals to think like a government, but about, again, covertly coercing them into adopting a mentality of governing themselves and those around them. So govern mentality. So in order to understand the means by which governmentality is proliferated, we need to talk about Foucault's understanding of disciplinary power. So this is the second thing I wanted to talk about. So for disciplinary power, Foucault's notion of disciplinary power is nothing like traditional notions of power, according to which, and this is a quote, power is something that can be possessed, that it is primarily repressive in its exercise, and that it can be located in a single centralized source like the state or the economy. So when most people think about power, that's what they think about. This person is powerful. This company is powerful. They exercise power in a very sort of simplistic manner. But Foucault's understanding of power is a lot more complicated than that. So he illustrates a distinction between these different understandings of power by pointing to earlier historical epochs in which everyone more or less believed in the divine right to rule. So under such a scenario, if someone tries to commit regicide by attempting to murder the king, everyone would have agreed that the punishment for even attempting to murder the king is death. But more than that, as a deterrent, the individual accused of regicide, was tortured in a public spectacle in which the hand with which they attempted the murder is burnt, and then they were dismembered alive until they succumbed to their pain. So today, by contrast, we no longer believe in the divine right to rule. And we live in, again, ostensibly democratic societies. So, in democratic societies, you can't punish everyone in the town square. It just doesn't make any sense. There's no way of deterring people from rebelling against the system in the same way that we used to do. So for this reason, Foucault argued that disciplinary power underwent a sort of transformation where it went from being inflicted directly on the body to being inflicted through the body, through what Foucault calls the microphysics of power. So without getting into the minutiae of that, this sort of reflects the shift away from capricious monarchical forms and models of power, which identified the right to punish with the personal power of the sovereign, and so that is the ruling class, and towards that of reformers who were looking to render the power to punish more effective and more constant and detailed in its effects, while diminishing its economic and political costs. So in other words, we needed to make punishment less noticeable, more efficient, less costly. And so in order to demonstrate this, Foucault points to the panopticon as sort of the architectural manifestation of this new kind of power. So what is the panopticon? The panopticon was a kind of prison proposed by Jeremy Bentham. It is characterized by, it's a cylindrical prison block with prisoners on all sides. And at the center of this sort of 360-degree observation tower that can see all of the prisoners at all times. And so from the observation tower, individual prisoners can be observed. However, from the cells, only the observation tower is really visible. But while prisoners can see the tower, their gaze is halted by Venetian blinds or a one-way, or is it a one-way mirror or two-way mirror? Two-way mirror. So they can see the observation tower, they know it's there, but they can't tell if anyone is actually watching them. So they know that they could be observed at any point in time, but they don't know if they actually are. So as Foucault put it, the panopticon induces, and this is a quote, in the inmate, a state of conscious and permanent visibility that assures the automatic functioning of power, so as to arrange things that the surveillance is permanent in its effects, even if it is discontinuous in its action, that the perfection of power should tend to render its actual exercise unnecessary, that this architectural apparatus should be a machine for creating and sustaining a power relation independent of the person who exercises it. Bentham laid down the principle that power should be visible and unverifiable. So it sounds more complicated than it actually is. I think it's in part from the translation from French to English. But I have a question for Sin. Can you think of any examples of panoptic surveillance in our society? I guess this would be for so I didn't know Redgrave was going to be on the podcast when I was writing my notes here. So this could be a question for Sin and Redgrave, because I came prepared with 3 different examples. So can either of you think of any examples of panoptic surveillance in our society?
No, our society is perfect.
If I may, I think there's another detail about the panopticon that I think is relevant.
Sure.
Which is that I think one of his key points was that you could operate this massive structure with hundreds, if not thousands, of prisoners, and you would only need a single guard on duty. and that person can take days off because the threat of it is sufficient, because all you need is for it to become understood that a person may or may not be in there, and that is sufficient to coerce obedience.
Yeah, and in the context of a prison, the idea is rehabilitation, right? You're rehabilitating the prisoners so that to bring them in line with what the societal expectations are of how they should behave.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I have an example of that.
What's that?
My mother.
Sure. Absolutely.
No, but honestly, I think that is a good point, because even if our parents are not there, so I think that's a great example, actually. Even if our parents are not there, we behave in a certain manner that we, I guess not everyone necessarily has that type of relationship with their parents. I would consider myself very fortunate in the type of relationship I have with my parents, and like the values that they instilled within me. Even if they're not here, I still behave in a manner that I think they would approve of, regardless of whether they're there or not. And so I think that's a tremendous example. Redgrave, did you have any examples? Yeah,
so I mean, with the invasion of the internet into every aspect of our lives, sort of the court of public opinion has kind of become that, in a sense, where the threat of, if I say something, are people going to hear it, has become a very real threat. And I use the word threat in kind of, it's a much looser manner than if we're talking about prison rehabilitation. But if you go online and you say something now, it's up there and anyone can see it. And they can see it, but they might not.
So you mean like the fear of being canceled, or...
I think that can be an aspect of it, absolutely, is like the fear of being canceled, or the fear of, you don't know if you say something. And I think it's mostly just not knowing. And, I know I've heard a lot of Twitch streamers who have said that the number one thing that like scares them about their job security and about their profession and all that stuff is mostly like they don't know what the rules are to the game. And when they don't know what the rules are to the game, you have to walk on eggshells, and you have to walk a very fine line not to tip any boats and not to cause any harm to your profession, because like you have these massive organizational bodies now like Twitch and YouTube, which can shut you down if they want. Mm-hmm. And these are...
There goes your livelihood, right?
Yeah. These are your... I guess I don't know exactly how like Twitch partnership stuff works, but I imagine it's something like a contract employee relationship.
Not an employee. I think you would technically be considered a contractor.
Are you? I guess, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Because then they would have to like give you some sort of benefit.
They would have to give you rights and and they would have to take care of you, which they definitely don't want to do. So
it's
I guess that makes more sense.
Gig economy, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So
no, I think it's an interesting example.
Yeah, a gig economy is a good way to put it too. If you're a musician and record labels hold all the power, and then you don't know if they're watching you or listening to you or something like that. So I think you can find examples of this kind of unverifiable, all omnipresent judging eye, maybe. Mm-hmm. I think you can find examples of that all over the place in modern society. If anything, it's becoming more common as we become more connected, which, is a good thing and can be a bad thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think just building on that, the idea in theory that, the NSA could be listening to your conversations at any point in time is another one as well.
So I live in America, and after 9/11, there was something called the Patriot Act, which was put into place, which basically gave the FBI the right to wiretap individuals who they believed were threats to national security. Mm-hmm. And so without the individual's consent or awareness, basically the government could look at your phone calls, your internet history. They could subpoena ISPs. They could do anything they wanted, and you wouldn't have a choice in the matter. And so the Patriot Act was like a very controversial thing for a long time. And then people kind of, as they are wont to do, they kind of moved on and forgot about it.
Yeah.
But it's still there.
Still there, yeah. And I would argue, in fact, that the powers have been expanded in the years since. So, yeah, especially with the internet, yeah.
I would imagine so, but that's definitely not like my.
Because even now, when you're on PSN and like you're in a private chat, like I think it says something to the effect of like your private chat could be monitored at any time. So the examples I had as well, domed CCTV cameras. So a surveillance camera with the black dome on it. So it serves a couple of purposes. One purpose is that it could have a camera inside that, you know, rotates so that you don't necessarily see where the camera is pointing. It could be a fake camera. There's no camera there at all.
Yeah.
So like, and even a surveillance camera with a red light on it, even without the dome, it's still sufficient in some cases if you have it in a store to make people think, okay, I shouldn't shoplift in front of this camera because it's watching and it will record me and then I'll be arrested and go to jail. In education, when I'm lecturing at the front of a lecture hall, you know, it's not quite a full panopticon, but it's sort of like a half circle in front of me. But, you know, when I'm making eye contact with a certain part of the room, might not be staring directly at you, but you might be less inclined to be looking down at your phone if you see that I'm looking in your general direction. In education, likewise, the idea of grades. Grades are an example of surveillance. So sort of in line with Sin's example about, you know, your parents, that you behave in a certain way such that you don't want to disappoint your parents. Even when they're not there, you're behaving in a way that you think your parents would approve of. Likewise with grades, your prof or your teacher doesn't care whether you're studying at home. All they care for is that you are ready for the exam or that you could complete your assignment on time. But there's something that compels us. So grades are obviously a dreadful indicator for many people of how smart they are. But they're taken as this proxy for how smart you are and how hard you worked. Because, you know, like education is designed for one type of person. It tries to discipline you into conformity. I dropped out of high school twice, and now I have a PhD. But in part of that was understanding how the education system sort of normalizes you into conformity, and then doing what I could to sort of work around that and to, you know, work around my own personal weaknesses as far as the education system was concerned. And then the final example that I have is a good one in that it's something that every kid, I think, in the Western world is aware of. Every single child. It's a thing, a person, technically, who coerces them into behaving in a certain way based on some sort of unexplained mechanism of surveillance.
Katekyo Hitman Reborn.
I remember that. That's the baby hitman, right?
Yeah.
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 So I'll say this person, it could be that one. I don't know who that is, but sorry. Just please continue. This person, he sees you while you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake.
He knows if you've been bad or good. So be good, for goodness sake.
Lennon.
It's our fourth consecutive Lennon reference.
Lennon and or Papa Smurf.
Yeah.
Actually, I think he's Karl Marx.
So Santa Claus.
I like how Aegon's just like ignoring us.
I'm just gonna plow through it. Yeah.
That's a very good example, though. That's
because every kid in the Western world, for the most part, I think, is given this example of, you know, pardon my language, don't you be a little shit? Don't you know Santa Claus is watching and paying attention? And it's a way of, and it's kind of sad because it's tied into capitalism and what, you know, kids wanting to open new things and, you know, but all year kids are told in certain places in the world, you know, you better behave because Santa Claus is like, it's really creepy when you think about it. There are so many different examples in our society of panoptic surveillance where it's a form of surveillance that is visible. You know, it's there in theory. You know, there's the possibility of being watched, but it's unverifiable. So this accomplishes two things. One, it moves discipline away from the personal rights, the divine right to rule that doesn't exist anymore. We live in democratic societies, air quotes around democratic societies. We have, air quotes, individual freedom. And, you know, but we're still conformed, or we're still disciplined into conformity through this visible but unverifiable form of surveillance. All those who are deemed to be behaving in a manner that is not considered within the range of normal and acceptable behavior are disciplined into conformity by virtue of the disciplinary power. So again, the example of grades in school is you're disciplined into conformity because if you're not passing your classes, you have to do them again. And then if you're not doing them again, then you end up dropping out and working in, some job that doesn't require an education. And so, you're either disciplined into conformity or you are sort of relegated to a lower class of society.
And I will say those jobs that require less education are becoming rarer and rarer. So the message is becoming like, no, you have to do this, otherwise there's no other option for you. Because 50 years ago, what you could do with a high school diploma, like the difference between 50 years ago and today is astronomical. The kinds of professions you could get, the kinds of independence or stability you could achieve with even a high school diploma 50 years ago compared to today it's like a cliff.
Yeah, and I think that's in part due to technology, but also in part due to the rise of neoliberalism and union busting and things like that. So, but yeah, I think those two things definitely go hand in hand. And so my last sort of point before we actually get it to Bloodborne is the idea of biopower. And so this is building on Foucault's ideas. The scholars I'm sort of citing here are Paul Rabineau and Nicholas Rose. So biopower at its simplest possible level is a term which captures the implications of Foucault's assertion that power is now, and this is a quote from Foucault, situated in exercise at the level of life. So put it in another way, simply as you can put it, biopower is the power to do three things. To make die, so that's sort of more traditional conception of biopower. You're killing someone or sentencing them to death, the power to make die. And then the two that are a little bit more recent, which is to let someone die, and then also to let someone live. So, to make die, again, is pretty self-explanatory. To let die is the power. So, for example, in the United States, where you had for a few years, sorry, Redgrave.
It's okay. It's been a rough few years for us.
For a few years, you had an option to get public insurance. That system definitely had flaws as well, so-called quote-unquote Obamacare. And, that was a step forward, but that has since been repealed. And what is in place now, once again, is a system in which insurance companies and legislators are putting people in a position where they are letting them die because they don't have insurance, they don't have sufficient money to pay for the care they need. So they have the ability, the United States, richest country in the world, they have the ability to give all of their citizens the top quality care that they sort of deserve as human beings, but they don't. So they're letting them die. So that's an example of biopower. And then on the flip side, letting people live. So on the flip side, using that same example, you're letting people live because, you coerce people who are having children to, to extract the cord blood from their umbilical cords so that they then get put on a public exchange. And then some rich person can go and pay to get the stem cells from that cord blood to treat some ailment they have. So these are all things that have sort of gone with, again, the technological advances in biomedicine as a way of letting particular people live and letting particular people die. And so the quote from Rose and Rabineau is, if we are in an emergent moment of vital politics, celebration or denunciation are insufficient as analytical approaches. So in other words, this isn't about good or bad, even though, I've used examples that are pretty sort of morally black and white as I frame them. But it's not necessarily this is good, this is bad. These are just sort of this is the way things are happening and have happened. And so we're not necessarily looking at this from a moral lens. It's just society has changed in these ways, and these are the consequences of it. And so in order for us to make sense of these changes, we need new analytical tools which reflect this nuanced moral ambiguity. And so hence the idea of biopower. And so biopolitics, it follows, is the political contestations which invariably arise out of all of this. So that is politics which takes human vitality as its subject. So another example, which again, sort of as far as I'm concerned, morally black and white example, which is, taking away women's rights to choose what to do with their body as far as abortions are concerned in the United States. So taking away their bodily autonomy and the fact that it's a bunch of old white guys doing it is obviously problematic as well. But they have, and they're exercising in a way, that biopower, but it's bound up with all of these other things, human vitality. And so all of that is to say, looking at governmentality and disciplinary power in the Souls game. So this is my last section of notes. I apologize. So Demon Souls and Dark Souls are to varying degrees centered around monarchical forms of power. And so I think it's very interesting in that Bloodborne is unique in that the game world is ruled not by a monarch, even if in name, but an institution. And so you can argue that disciplinary power is in effect in each of these games because in almost all cases, the monarchy has effectively collapsed. But I think the effect of disciplinary power is especially apparent in Bloodborne. And so the Healing Church structured Yharnamite society in a manner that everyone is disciplined into this sort of discursive creation of all of these different identities. So you're a beast or you're a hunter is probably the most obvious example. Or you're a nun of the Healing Church, or you're a student of the Healing Church. So there are all these different examples of the roles that they have within society which are considered acceptable. And then anything outside of that, for example, the Pale Blood Hunter, is just, there's no room in that society for the idea of a Pale Blood Hunter, which is why everyone attacks us.
Yeah.
And then finally, biopower and biopolitics. So the Healing Church's decision to use Old Yharnam as a laboratory for beast blood. So that's the power to make die. But by virtue of using that power to make die, they're also trying to use the power or to take advantage of the power to let live, because they're using it as a laboratory so that they can further their ambition to ascend to a higher plane by using the people in this poor city. And then there's also the decision, likewise, to raid the fishing hamlet in search of a more effective form of blood ministration, the power to let live, and also the power to make die all the people who are there. And then all the contestations in and around these projects can be characterized as biopolitical struggles. So that's those are the end of my notes. So I'm going to shut up for a while and let other people talk.
Great podcast, everyone. Sophie, do the outro.
Good evening. This is Queen Yharnam with a special message for everybody listening. If my hereditary position has taught me anything, it's that if you want success, you have to work for it. And it breaks my heart to see channels like this one that refuse to put the effort in. Rather than follow the example set by their peers and receive hundreds of thousands of views covering Elden Ring, they have instead chosen to dedicate themselves to 10-year-old horror games and largely forgotten shonen anime. And if they want to do that, that's fine. They also never seem to ask anybody to like and subscribe. Perhaps they think that social media engagement grows on trees. And it would be wonderful to live in a world like that. But unfortunately, the relative popularity of their peers speaks for itself.
As someone who studied like Bertrand Russell and Wittgenstein, like listening to about Foucault is like interesting to me because that's not something I studied at all.
It's a bit different.
it's quite different in its scope.
Yeah, it's closer to what I studied, but not exactly. Like what I did drew on Foucault a lot, but I didn't really directly study him.
Yeah, I didn't study Foucault because I work in real science.
Yeah, it's a recurring joke we have.
Yeah.
One of our funny little games.
It is funny because social scientists will describe scientists as natural scientists, whereas scientists are just like, I'm a scientist, right?
Mm.
So,
well, and also the word
that's
science
fair.
is only like 150 years old. Like it's an absurdly modern concept, which is
but
something that is easy to
Bergenworth's
forget.
a good example of that. Because if you look at Bergenworth, they're combinations, like they're natural scientists, but they're also philosophers. They're also mystics.
Which is why they probably would have been described to Redgrave's point, in a historically consistent manner, would be described them as natural philosophers. That was the original term for science.
Yeah. So that was the term. So basically, like all of the modern sciences, all of the hard sciences, like have broken off piece by piece. So like in 2,000 years ago, everything was either, depending on what region of the world you were in, it was either philosophy or it was theology. Or it was, right? So like it was one of those two things. And then as understanding of the world increased, as understanding of cause and effect increased, as understanding of things like the weather increased, you had bits and pieces of theology and philosophy breaking off and becoming standardized and regulated and becoming quote unquote hard sciences.
Astrology and astronomy used to be the same thing.
Yeah.
Sure, totally.
Yeah. We talked about, I remember we talked about that on like 7 years ago.
Years ago.
We were doing the Astral Clock Tower. Yeah. No, we were doing the Astral Clock Tower, and I was specifically talking about how, like, the reason why people were so into, like, astrology and stuff is that, in a sense, the stars did actually tell you important things. The reason people would say, well, and this comes at Elden Ring happens all the time as well, but it's like this.
So I was
yeah,
say
the like stars are in control, but like the stars kind of are in control because if you look at the way like the world revolves around the sun and the world rotates, okay, well when that star is in that part of the sky, like there's going to be a good harvest. Like that's what was happening.
Yeah, and I mean, like imagine you put yourself in the shoes of a human being 1,500 years ago and see that like the North Star is always in the same spot.
Yeah,
always like, and we know now, thanks to like, our understanding of space and, stars and everything like that, that's just a coincidence, right? So like, it's just a coincidence that the North Star happens to line up with like the axis that the Earth.
It orbits the sun and rotates on its axis.
It rotates on its axis. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. That's the term I was looking for.
Or Redgrave.
Yeah.
The Earth is a panopticon, and the stars always watching.
That's true. Even if there's clouds, the stars are always there. And your light pollution, things like that. You're right.
Thank you.
So can we talk about this idea of these identities that are considered acceptable within the acceptable range of Yharnamite society? So I mentioned a couple, right? With the idea that you can be a hunter. You can be, one of the Yharnamites. Get on a beast. You're a beast. It's all your fault. Like just. So you can be a member of these angry mobs. Like that's an acceptable thing. You can be one of these people who barricades themselves in their house and, says disparaging things to people who come knocking. Can we think of any other additional examples of like things that are considered acceptable or unacceptable within the society?
But one thing that interested me that I wanted to talk to you about was with regard to like public execution versus a prison, which is that in Yharnam it's the beasts who are publicly executed. Very, very publicly, like they're burned and they're flogged and everything. But then there's also the mad. And the mad people are not the beasts, they're the people who gained too much insight, and they're the ones who were locked in a prison. Like, the hunters aren't publicly executed, it's the beasts. And the beasts aren't... Ludwig is the one... Ludwig is actually interesting because he's on the border. He's the one beast who is imprisoned. Everyone else is locked away.
And you learn, after you beat Ludwig, and you talk to him, you learn that, like... And it's this one throwaway line, but you learn that basically, like, he was a controversial figure in his time. Where, like, it was people debated whether or not he like, and this it's different from what you hear about in the base game where he's like overwhelmingly depicted as someone who was positively regarded. And but what you hear from his own words is that like he had many detractors. He was a controversial figure. There were people who did not approve of him. And so he very much does seem to have been like bordering this mid-level path. And he's also someone who went into the Chalice dungeons and found a whole bunch of spooky nonsense down there.
And there's this ongoing thing where like being a beast is not necessarily a physical thing. It's a mental thing. So you get like the narrow-minded man when you talk to him. He's saying like, well, how do I know you're not really a beast? Even though you're clearly talking to him. because he doesn't know. Because like you can be there's there's those people within the Yharnam mobs. They're hunters. They're like human, but they're completely covered in hair. They're enormous, and they're like dragging these tools behind them.
I think they're called huntsmen in the guide. I think
Yeah,
the
they're
guide
called
calls
like
them specifically huntsmen as opposed to like Yharnamite mob man.
I think,
or
they're called like the large huntsmen or something. I don't know. But like those people, they're accepted within the hunting groups. But then you also have them saying like, well, you as a like very normal looking human running around Yharnam, they will call you a beast. Because there's this constant paranoia about what is and isn't a beast because they can't quite figure it out. And then you also have the notion of like, remember in the DLC they say like beasthood crept up the right leg?
Yes.
And it's never made clear if that's actually true or not. But you have people like putting braces and things around their legs and hiding their legs on the off chance that it might happen. Like that, to make it sort of obvious that they're taking that precaution, even though it's maybe not even necessary.
There's another detail, which is the covering of one's eyes that a lot of Yharnamites do. And we learn in the DLC that blood drunkenness is extremely, like this is kind of hinted at in the base game, but in the DLC it's made explicit that is very much shown in the eyes. So you can see it in the eyes. And so this kind of superstition involved in Yharnam, and Yharnam is shown to be extremely superstitious when it comes to all manner of things, even though they have good right to be superstitious. But like, and so I think it's kind of another example of that, which is like, we cover our eyes because we don't really know what is actually going on. But we know that people with blood drunk eyes disappear in the middle of the night and are never seen again.
Yeah, it's I guess, yeah, there's a lot to unpack now that I'm thinking about it. You all are reminding me, thankfully, of parts of the game that I've forgotten. So, I'm thinking of...
It's a good game.
What Sophie said about the torture as a public spectacle in, even in Central Yharnam, first area, they have that massive beast that's been sort of strung out and they're on fire and everyone is sort of standing around their pitchforks, sort of comically like celebrating. But, I think that is actually distinct from the idea of torture as a public spectacle to reinforce the divine right to rule of the monarch and to dissuade people from behaving in a certain way, in that it's either distinct or the two examples are sort of blurred into one another because it serves the function of having all of these people, you can either be a hunter or you can be, or all these different identities that are considered acceptable. And so you have to allow, if you're telling people you're only a good member of society if you're this, or this. One of those things is a hunter. What does a hunter do? They walk around with their pitchforks and their torches. They say, "Get away, beast!" And then they string you up and they burn you. So it's a way, I think, of satiating the, pun not originally intended, but bloodlust of these Yharnamites, and then distracting them from the real terror in the situation, which is the healing church. And bringing it back to what Redgrave pointed out earlier, this idea of these ghost towns that exist in stretches of the Midwest in the United States, and in on the Pacific coast in Canada as well. There's a place I went over the course of my research that is a ghost town because there was a railway camp there and then no longer. So now it's just a really sad place where there's essentially no industry, no one has jobs.
The young people usually leave.
Yeah. And everyone in the healing church has abandoned everyone in Yharnam. In Central Yharnam and in Old Town or Old Yharnam, that like this entire institution has been, the entire town has been built up around this institution. The institution leaves, its leadership has gone mad and in various states of not actually functioning. And then the city likewise descends into this dreadful situation. But you have a situation where you have all these people who are so engaged in the things they're supposed to be engaged in, they don't even notice or care. The skeptical man, he is essentially, I'm thinking about that now. That character was really prescient because they would have been working on Bloodborne. It would have been working in the 2011 to 2014, that era. Like, certainly disinformation existed at that time, but it was not nearly as present as it is today and widespread as it is today. Like QAnon conspiracy theorists and stuff like that are essentially the narrow-minded man. He operates in the exact same way in sort of how he sees the world and how he inverts the actual power structure of the world in a very strange way.
Hello, Elana the Squalid Queen here. You know, I wish I lived on planet Twitter, spending all day interacting with my millions of subjects. Or at least I would think that if it weren't for all those people who insist on talking back. That's why I'm announcing a new grassroots campaign to raise funds so that I, Elana, can buy Twitter. Donation link in the description. Crypto only please, as I'm still on the PayPal naughty step. For further information on why I personally should be above criticism, please read my new detective novel. Back to the podcast.
Even under Foucault's conception of discipline, like there are certain people, and Foucault has a whole other area of his thought concerned with madness and civilization, which is not at the fore of my mind right now. I can't even really but there were ideas of what it meant to be someone who's quote unquote mad, in air quotes, has changed over time. But even then there was a certain, if you were past a certain threshold, they was sort of considered there was nothing really that could be done for you. And so is that what happened to Yamamura the Hunter? Like they were just considered too far gone to be rehabilitated back into the norms of this society.
The thing about madness in Bloodborne is that the madness is also presented as like you're on the precipice of revelation. So, in a sense, everyone in the Healing Church is trying to go mad. They're just trying to control the way in which they're going mad. Which is like, that's the part that appeals to me. The notion that they're trying to deal with things that are fundamentally irrational. That you can only relate to on a level that you can't deal with from like a natural sciences point of view. But they're trying to force everything into this mold that it doesn't fit into.
Yeah, so like Master Willem's revelation in The Great One's Wisdom is that like we are thinking on the basis of planes. We haven't even come close to scratching this because the truth is irrational.
Yeah.
Like according to our fundamental concept. And it's funny, like the Foucault madness stuff, like this is like the one thing about Foucault that I have read quite a bit about. And although it's been some time, but like my understanding is that he broke down different time periods and how madness was appreciated over time. This is something that I also think a lot of people have written in response to this stuff and said like, I don't actually agree with this. But basically that there was a period of time during the Renaissance. And this is Foucault's argument, I believe. I could be not doing a great job. But his argument is that there was a period of time during the Renaissance where madness was considered to be a byproduct of brilliance. And so you have this idea of the genius, the Renaissance man, the brilliant mind, and that as a consequence of having this kind of brilliance that lets you tap into artwork, that lets you think of things the way that people had never thought of, and that as a byproduct of that, what you got is madness. And that it was, and that it was viewed as kind of like a positive thing. And then at some point in time, and I believe it's a very long time since I've read this book, but at some point in time, madness became viewed almost entirely as something to sequester from the population.
Yeah.
And that with the rise of like modern medicine, which takes place in like the 17th, 18th centuries, and then you get what we kind of think of as modern medicine, madness kind of became viewed as this thing to be hidden away.
That's very impressive. Because I didn't remember any of that, and I have this book on my shelf. the very brief synopsis on the back reads,
like The History of Madness? Is that?
It was Madness and Civilization.
I think that's the only book by him I've read.
It says, what does it mean to be mad? In Madness and Civilization, perhaps his masterpiece, Michel Foucault examines the archaeology of madness in the West from 1500 to 1800. From the late Middle Ages, when insanity was still considered part of everyday life and fools and lunatics walked the streets freely, to the time when such people began to be considered a threat, asylums were first built and the walls were erected between the quote-unquote insane and the rest of humanity. So Redgrave nailed it, bang on. That's exactly what his argument was.
I would also say that I completely disagree with that argument. I think you look at the history of mental illness, you look at the history of schizophrenia, you look at every culture conserved across cultures, race, religion, ethnicity. This, you look at in the history of schizophrenia, it has pretty much always been viewed as something to put away and something you don't want to be near. It is, the people are viewed in an almost universally negative light.
I think Foucault also looked at things from a very Eurocentric perspective.
Yeah,
that's one argument you could make. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that obviously impacts the way he sort of theorizes the world. But it's interesting because this idea of striking a balance between, and I know I talked about this, I'm pretty sure in Bloodborne Let's Talk Lore, just that the more you learn about the world, the more you do sort of, not quite on the same level of frenzy, but like you do experience a sort of depression in some cases that comes along with it, depending on your area of study. And I do think it's interesting because it spoke to me at the time anyway in a very specific way, but that's just because I was approaching it in a very particular context. So I don't think that would necessarily be a universal experience.
So there's an area in Mensis that is literally called the Panopticon in the guide. It's of the ground floor part where like the floor is falling away and there's all the little silver guys. That area is canonically called the Panopticon. It's because Mensis is supposed to be a prison. Like it has all the cages. Yeah, so it's like the floor of the Mensis Panopticon is that room. So it's got all the this is like those things with the books in them? Those are prison cages. It's meant to be like Tower of Latria. But they've replaced the prisoners with the books.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting.
The little silver dudes that run around, like, they're now canonically called Mergo attendants, but like if you go back into their old data, they're called the jailers.
So they really were going for a Tower of Latria vibe then.
I want to say in one of the earliest interviews about Project Beast, they were saying they wanted to make Latria into a whole game.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That was the goal, was that they wanted to make Latria an entire game, because that was one of the most memorable, arguably the most memorable area in Demon's Souls.
All these people are brought to the Healing Church. The Healing Church are the ultimate authority on like what is illness, what is sickness, what is health. And they are the ones who decide essentially arbitrarily what constitutes a person who needs to go to this wing of the building and then who's going to be sent back. And it's nothing to do with actually healing them. It's entirely about them imposing a specific, like, their own set of standards on people. So to them, like, someone who responds in a certain way to treatment, it's important in as far as it matters to their goal, which is ascending. Their goal is not to heal people.
Yeah, Sophie, and you say the goal is not a healing, and in Japanese it's actually called the medical church.
Yeah. It's I don't know the actual word, but it's more like the church that is like the church hospital. The hospital church or the medical church rather than the healing church.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There's another detail, which is that you read a lot about how the healing church would say that people were sick who were not sick.
Yeah.
So Simon the Harrowed, when you get his garb in the fishing hamlet, you find that like his job and like the job of many of the early church hunters was not to hunt down beasts. It was to pretend to be a normal, regular person and accuse other people of being sick, thus giving a justification to have them taken away. Which, when you look at the history of psychiatry, it's been weaponized as a tool for eliminating undesirables ever since its conception. And that's kind of gone hand in hand with tyrants and with authoritarianism in getting people who are troublemakers and saying they're sick. And that's why they're talking like, they're not talking about how the government is evil because they have a good point. They're talking about it because they're mad, they're insane, and so they need to be taken away and put into a prison somewhere.
This is true of, I think, medicine in general. Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore opened in a poor black neighborhood, in part because, the history of it, as it's told, is, they opened it there because then they could open this wing, which would allow poor black patients to come in and receive free treatment. What they don't tell you is that they did it so that they could have all of these poor black test subjects.
Yeah.
So again, the similar thing that, like, they're on the one hand sort of showing this benevolent power to let live by providing free care to black patients. On the other hand, there was a woman named Henrietta Lacks. She was the direct descendant of cotton farming slaves, and I think immediately following the end of the Jim Crow laws, and she went to Johns Hopkins Hospital. She had a form of, I believe, cervical cancer that was so incredibly severe that her cells were reproducing faster than they were dying. So Henrietta Lacks is still alive today if you consider that her cells are all over the world, but the cells that were taken from her without her informed consent. She didn't know what she was agreeing to. She signed a form, regardless of if she signed a form that actually indicated consent, she didn't really understand what she was consenting to. So her cells are all over the world, even today. Research labs all over the world. People made millions off of those cells. Her family could not afford healthcare because they were continued to be poor. And so, I think medicine in general, Redgrave is correct in that, like, it's about not just getting rid of undesirables, but how can you take undesirables and use them as instruments to other ends that you have. And so, again, in the Healing Church, we see this time and again, and it's really not, they say truth is stranger than fiction, right? But, in this case, there's a lot of stuff that you can directly look at. Obviously the fishing hamlet is a very obvious example of that with Minamata disease, which Redgrave was at the forefront of pointing that out in the early days of Bloodborne.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I know I tend to view Lawrence and Gehrman as being sympathetic characters, and that's something that, like, I know a lot of people have disagreed with me about. I still kind of find their overall characters to be sympathetic, but that's not to say, like, the things Lawrence did were, like, objectively horrible. Even, taking the good faith argument and saying that he really was trying to develop this cure for all diseases that would lead human beings to a new age of prosperity, even taking that good faith argument, like, the things that him and his organization actually did were, like, unquestionably horrific in the details and the specifics of them. And so it's interesting because, like, we read all about how the church doctors don't view a disease as something to be treated or something to be cured. They view it as something to be understood. They view the madness, and they view the beast blood, and they view all of these, the side effect of, imbibing in blood ministration, which is that it makes you a literal monster. They view those not necessarily as things to stop, but as things to understand. You see this in, like, the white church garb.
The black church garb.
Yeah.
The black church garb, if I'm remembering right, is the one that also says that they sometimes treated people who were not sick.
Yeah, it says that they would basically just go around, like...
Yeah.
And they would accuse people of being ill even if they weren't.
Right. There was this constant fear amongst everyone in the fear of not know. And this is something that you can definitely relate to in 2022, which is the fear that there's a disease out there. It's not understood. We don't know what's causing it. It's not understood. It can happen to anyone at any time for any reason. Mm. And what you have is this population that becomes paralyzed by fear.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's this interesting little vignette in Cathedral Ward where, like, it's actually where you find the Black Church set. And it says, like, the doctors will come knocking, but you find on a dead body, that is near a door where someone's like saying in very unconvincing way, "Oh, praise the church," and you see these Yarnamites around there with sickles. It's like they're actually waiting for the doctor to come, and then they're killing the doctors because like it's reached that level of paranoia.
So active resistance, sort of.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, it's an act of resistance, but like they're also like, I guess I read Yharnam differently to the two of you, because to me, like, Yharnam is inhabited by humans because they're Thumerians who became humans over time. It wasn't sort of colonized by humans, which means that all that old Thumerian stuff is their own history. It's their own culture. Like, they're basically sort of very, very diluted Thumerians. And the reason I think that's important is because, like, when Lawrence shows up, he's got the old blood and he instantly becomes number one, even though he's an outsider. And the way that I see that is Lawrence basically shows up. He's like not quite a huckster, but he's showing up and he's like, hey, you're the city that's like, you place all this value on blood and all this value on like your heritage. Here I am, and I've got in material form a link to your heritage that you've lost. And that's why he becomes so popular. That's why he's able to ascend, because he's able to control that. I guess, like, again, like, prescient. I don't know if it's prescient, history repeats, but, like...
I think that you bring up a very excellent point, because especially when you go into Old Yharnam, at the bottom of Old Yharnam, you find the Church of the Good Chalice.
Yes.
Which, before the Healing Church, you can see that, like, they were probably not as intricate in their rituals as the kinds of altars you find in Thumaru Ihil, but, like... You find the Church of the Good Chalice. You find that, like, people seemed to be following these old traditions in a manner. It's never really been 100% clear to me whether, like, the Thumerians were human beings who like grew so twisted, or whether they were like literally a different species. But like, you still have Thumerians walking around. Logarius was Thumerian.
Yeah, yes.
And so you still have a lot of those people and those sort of remnants of the old monarchy who are still walking around and are still engaging in some of those traditions.
Yeah. We haven't talked much about like the like knowledge production aspect of the Healing Church.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like there's a Yosefka's clinic, for example, is like when you get a chance to look around it from like the back and also a little bit from the front, like you can see it's designed in a way where there's an operating table or two or three in the center of the room.
Yeah.
And then there are these pews above. So like there's a second or there's another layer to the building that like the player never gets to go to. But like there's a place where people, presumably like medical students, would go and sit and watch the doctor's work as like to study. And one thing that I think is like significant about the Healing Church is that it brings education to Yharnam. And it brings these new layers of social, economic, and like academic authority to Yharnam that did not exist before the Healing Church was there. The School of Mensis, for example, which like exactly when the School of Mensis is happening and like what's going on with like the beginnings and the foundation of that is never really explained. But like what you see in the Unseen Village, what you see in the lecture hall, is that like there was really an attempt to bring up a new generations of educated populations in Yharnam, which it to me is one of the more interesting aspects of the Healing Church. Bergenworth is explicitly called a college where people go to learn. So like Maria, for example, like traveled from, I don't know if it's explicitly said that she traveled from Canehurst or she traveled from somewhere to Bergenworth to study and to learn. And then the Healing Church, like first and foremost, to like the way I envision it, is that above all else, it's a school, it's a university, it's a research center where they're trying to learn new things and they're trying to understand new things.
I mean, to me, it's like there is already knowledge in Yharnam, and what the Healing Church are trying to do is they're trying to interpret that in their own framework. But their framework is incompatible with it. This is getting back to what was like this notions of incompatibility. Because like when you break Bloodborne down, what's driving the story is like an act of infanticide that is being like the ghost of the mother and the ghost of the child are both being like that vengeance is being visited upon the healing church. So at the center of the story, of all of it, like whether it's the fishing hamlet or whether it's Canehurst, it's this sense of like there is this maternal grief. And it's about this like bond between like a mother and a child, and the healing church can't grasp that. They want to understand it in a naturally scientific way. So like I brought this up many times before, but like the whole story of Bloodborne is just these guys encountering something they don't understand, and they respond by killing it and cutting it up, as if that will make it make sense to them. So like what I find is really interesting is that like the old Yharnam rituals, the old Thumerian rituals, it's all about using dead bodies. The healing church are also all about using dead bodies, but for completely different reasons, completely different approaches. So, like the healing church, they're performing these like scientific sort of autopsies, weighing everything, figuring out how this all functions, measuring different kinds of blood, all this other stuff. The Yharnamites and the Thumerians are also getting dead bodies, but they're doing it intuitively. They're just channeling the notion of like what is death, what is grief, what is loss, and that's what's powering them.
And it's mystic for them. It's
yes.
I don't know if I would use the term religious, but it's like it's spiritual for them. So like all the materials you use in these chalices are like this is a spiritual practice for them. You find the pilgrims in the Thumaru dungeon, they're very rare, but you find them and they're carrying like hermetic symbols and like pendants and stuff like that. So this is like, it's like an alchemical mysticism, sort of like, that kind of cross section between like karmic religions and Carl Jung that like is so popular in the West. And it's that kind of view to it. Whereas the healing church is quite literally collecting corpses off the streets, shipping them off to Hemwick to be dissected into various body parts that can be shipped to the School of Mensis to like literally, like you were saying, like weigh them, look at them, compare one to another on this very basic material level.
So what's interesting specifically about what happens with Mensis is that, like, despite being part of the healing church, despite, like, the leader is wearing the academic gown and everything, they end up doing what the Yharnamites did. They just go, oh, fuck it. And then they just perform this. It's just necromancy. And that actually gets them results.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mikolash is wearing I believe he's wearing a Birkenworth uniform.
Yeah, yeah.
Directly. So, and it's like, so like the upper levels of the healing church, like the organizing body post Lawrence, it's composed of the choir and the School of Mensis. And what you get is this sense that, first and foremost, like those two factions, like they're working together, but they completely disagree about a lot of fundamental stuff. And two, what you get is you get this sense that the School of Mensis, like you said, kind of goes so far that they come back to the beginning. And they sort of like, they take all their new information and understanding and awareness, and it leads them to the same point that the Thumerians came to, or in their old, in like the previous kind of reigning body.
And what's like significant again about what you do to ascend, because like Lawrence and Willem and everyone, they're all trying to ascend. You end up ascending and you do it with the third chords. And it's not that the third chords have like magic Great One juice in them that you're like imbibing. It's that the third chord represents, like, it's that link between parent and child. Like, that's what's driving the plot. And what ends up happening is, like, you don't get it in, like, okay, if I get enough third chords in me, it, like, changes my biology. It's that upon, like, sort of meditating and, like, engaging with this thing that is this link between a parent and a child that have been separated, you just come to understand that. And it's not something that's rational. And that's ultimately what gets you there. It's not the attempts to, like, codify everything in a rational way, which is what Lawrence and Willem are doing.
Well, and to that point, just building on something that Redgrave was saying earlier about how the Thumerians would have done these things, it was a bit more mystical, or, you know, there was more, it was a more spiritual endeavor. But, I think even then we have to be careful with terms like that, because I've talked about the idea of discourse and discursively creating subjects. And so that is, again, in a Foucauldian sense, that you create something by virtue of it being something that, it being the opposite of something else, or it negates something else. Or, you know, in the context of the healing church, they're coming and they're trying to create a rational process in which, and methodology in which they sort of specifically measure everything, and then anything that isn't measurable is just sort of discarded. But then, you know, then looking back, they look at the Pthumerians and they brand things as being mystical because it's not rational like they would do it.
Yeah.
So back then there was they didn't consider themselves mystics. They didn't consider themselves to be spiritual. It was just what they did. That was it. It only become labeled as such in retrospect.
Yeah, I think that a lot of this also has to do with like the word religion. It's a concept that is derived pretty much directly from the Abrahamic religions. And so like in English, we have this concept that something is either scientific or religious. And other cultures don't really have that idea. And like one thing that's like a very important detail about the healing church is that, and I know, Sophie, I know you and I have talked about this in the past, and it's like, they use all these Christian words and stuff, and, you know, they have vicars and cathedrals and all that stuff, but like, it is not modeled or designed and does not operate in any way like a Christian church. No. At all. Like
it's Umbrella Corporation.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, I used to think, I think I saw it in a movie or something once, that if the cops were after you and trying to arrest you, you could just walk into any church and claim sanctuary, sanctuary, and they couldn't arrest you. So yeah, it's this thing that exists in our sort of cultural consciousness, right?
Yeah.
So that's, or maybe I was just a stupid kid. Who knows?
But and also like it's so heavily inspired by Brotherhood of the Wolf visually, and like there is literally a scene in Brotherhood of the Wolf where they do that. There is a hospital set up in a church. Yeah.
The entire, for those of you watching, if you're interested in the aesthetic of Bloodborne, which is so amazingly cool, and you want to see the movie that someone watched and said, yo, that's cool. Brotherhood of the Wolf is a movie that I'm not going to say all of, but like the majority of the visual aesthetic of specifically the hunters and the trick weapons.
Let's do a survey to see who the true Bloodborne fan is.
Okay.
Who here saw Brotherhood of the Wolf when it came out in its original French language? Raise your hand.
I saw it subtitled.
I saw it subtitled and also not when it originally came out.
I've not seen it at all. So there's a scale here of fandom.
Okay, since there's no video, I raised my hand ASAP because it's me.
It's you. You are the true Bloodborne all along.
Hey, you didn't need any of us for your YouTube channel.
Then it would be a Reborn channel.
The appeal of the Reborn content is that it's the most generic shonen anime I've ever seen, but to you it is incredibly inventive. And I'm just predicting every single plot twist and just like, what? Like, oh, is there going to be a tournament arc? Have you watched this before?
She watched it
Am I playing a trick?
If I've seen Detective Conan, is there anything I should expect from...
Okay, I'm going to pitch it to you. What if there was like a lazy teenage kid, but he actually had within him enormous power that only came out when he was under pressure? I mean, what if I told you also that like he met a bunch of friends and all his friends were experts in one specific kind of weapon, and then later on they met another group of people who all had opposite weapons and they had to have a tournament?
It's so original. I've never seen anything like it before.
Because she's never seen shonen anime before.
No. It's very good.
They're all the same.
All I know is Dragon Ball Z, and that's it.
Honestly, if you want to get a good picture of the shonen, honestly, that's a pretty good vertical slice.
Yeah.
And I guess Dragon Ball Super I've seen, but yeah.
We've seen MD Geist.
MD Geist is so good. Have y'all seen MD Geist?
She's being sincere.
MD Geist 1 is good, but MD Geist 2 is a masterpiece. It's like still relevant even today, even though it was made like a while ago.
Is it about a ghost doctor? Is that just what I'm...
What?
Yeah, MD,
Geist?
Geist.
I don't know.
No,
The
it's
MD
about
stands
the
for
most...
most dangerous. Okay.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's very different from what I was thinking. Okay, I was thinking about like a friendly ghost who like treats the sick.
Much like the Hunters of the Healing Church, he is so dangerous he's trapped in a prison. I should also point out to the two of you, because you haven't been following very closely what we've been doing, we made friends with an anime podcast. So we're now watching anime with them as well.
That is cool.
Yeah.
They're called Pen Pals,
They're called
and they're
Pen
so
Pals.
good.
And Sin is
good.
currently coming up with lists of anime we have to watch with them.
We were supposed to have Redgrave on for a horror thing, and then Elden Ring came out and it ruined all my plans.
I love horror. Yeah.
Sophie, do the outro.
That was the Snack Covenant episode F6, with special guests Aegon and Redgrave.
Aegon, if people want to find you on social media, where should they look for you?
You can look for me on YouTube, just search for Aegon of Astora, or on Twitter, where I'm very infrequently put updates about my Elden Ring playthrough, so I'm going to be dark until I'm finished that, but you can find me on Twitter at Aegon_of_Astora, and yeah, so don't know how long it's going to be till my Elden Ring playthrough is out, but it is in production, so you'll see it eventually.
Excellent! Can't wait. And Redgrave, where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, so the only social media I have is I have a Twitter account, which is DMC_Redgrave, so you can find me there. My Twitter is mostly fighting game memes and shitposts, with the occasional artwork being retweeted. But I do stream sometimes. I've been streaming a bit of Elden Ring, which has been fun. And I also occasionally stream fighting games, and I might get back to that now that the honeymoon period of Elden Ring is sort of starting to fade away. But yeah, you can. If I'm up to anything, it'll be on there, so you'll be able to see it there.
Excellent! So, thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, Sin.
Thank you, Aegon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Redgrave.
Thank you for having me. It's been very nice.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. And see y'all next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye. I wrote a whole thing about it in this thing about how like Radigan America still doesn't. It feels like they were going for something and then they swerved and did a 180.
The whole game
at some
feels
point.
like that.
Unlike Fallout 3, which is perfect.
Unlike Fallout 3, the only good video game,
Yeah.
according to Sin.
So. Thank you, Redgrave. So, the Healing Church.
The only thing I remember about
that
Fallout.
whole thing.
The only thing I remember about Fallout 3 is that my brother and I still laugh about that quest where like you're fighting mutants or something, and somebody's like, by the way, there's some fucking vampires in this town.
Oh
And
god,
you're
I
like,
remember
what?
that, yes.
It's something my brother and I still joke about. Like the password on our Wi-Fi for a long time was like vampire issues, because it was just like it's this completely random event where someone's like, by the way, there's fucking vampires in this town. What? Anyway, that game is weird, and I prefer Fallout 2, I guess. I'm one of those old angry people.
She won't play Fallout 2, I tried to make her.
Too much clicking.
Yeah, it's never mind.
Back to the subject.
Back to the subject.
Late at night, I